haven't yet come across us, who haven't heard of us, we're kind of a grassroots big Midrash, which we started about 6-7 months ago, which was a kind of collaborative project between this shul here, 126, and also Ichud Shabbat Zion at 86. Last year we did most of the shurim there. This year we're kind of sharing it out between the two shurim more. We're having some shurim here. Rabbi Joe Wolfson has already got a pretty good shir going on Monday nights, if anyone is interested, at 8:30 on Parashat HaShavua. And then hopefully what we're going to do is we're going to start a new series on Rabbi Sacks and his thought every Tuesday night here at 9 o'clock. We still have a Gemara shir, if anyone is interested, on Sunday nights at 9 o'clock in Ichud Shabbat Zion. And we're hoping very much, as the shurim fill up, to put on more and more programming between both shuls. Anyway, putting all that aside, what is this series? What is this series really going to be about? So Rabbi Sacks is pretty much one of the most famous rabbis of the past couple of decades, who wrote pretty much to no end. I think he published around 30 different books. He wrote for Jewish audiences, he wrote for non-Jewish audiences, he spoke about pressing issues, he spoke about eternal issues, things which always have been questions, things which are always interesting. He wrote about society, he wrote about Parashat HaShavua, he wrote about almost everything that there is to write about. And the kind of idea of this series is kind of collectively as a group to kind of try to really kind of map and get a grip and an understanding of his thought. There's just so much stuff out there that where does one begin? How does one kind of understand what Rabbi Sacks' approach, what his ideology, what his thoughts were? It might really just be a big organization activity, trying to get all these amazing ideas which we've all heard or seen or have reference to in Rabbi Sacks' thought, and really try to understand them and concretize them and maybe even challenge them. At the end of the day, Rabbi Sacks was a rabbi who spoke about many issues which other rabbis didn't speak about. So that there might be certain pressing modern day issues where we only have one approach, which has been made available to us because he's the only person that wrote about it. Maybe we can think other thoughts. We could produce other ideas. We definitely will try to both understand and challenge the different ideas which we'll look at across this series of shura. Where to start? I was thinking to myself, how does one start a series of shurim Rabbi Sacks? There's no end of material. He wrote so much. Where can one start? So what I decided to do, which is going to be the topic for today, is I decided to follow his advice. What is the most important, transformative pasuk in the Torah? So I actually saw a clip where Rabbi Sacks was asked this question, and he picked a certain pasuk, a certain idea, which we're going to look at today. And I thought that if he thought that was a pretty good place to start, that was a pretty informative, transformative idea within Judaism, then that's probably a good place for us to start. The pasuk is a very well-known pasuk, it's a very straightforward pasuk, which comes up pretty much right at the beginning of the Torah. We're going to read it together, we're going to discuss what it means, and then we're going to try to see how Rabbi Sacks really used this whole pasuk, this whole idea, as a springboard for talking about a lot of important central ideas and themes. Source 1. If you look on the source sheet, anyone want to read? Do you have a volunteer? Go for it.
You want Hebrew, English?
Read in Hebrew, and then when we read Rabbi Sacks, we'll be able to look at it in English.
ויאמר אלוקים נעשה אדם בצלמנו בדמותנו וירדו בקדמת הים ובעוף השמיים ובבהמה ובכל הארץ ובכל הרמס הרומס על הארץ.
One second. Okay. So let's just take a step back. We have this pasuk. Where does this pasuk come up? It comes up right at the end of the 6 days of creation. What's about to be created? Humankind. What do we have? Naseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu. Let's make man in our image. Who's talking? Who seems to be talking? God, Hashem, right? What's God's image? What's the one thing that doesn't have an image? Pretty much, right? God. It's already a very strange pasuk, right? The only thing which we're actually not even allowed to make any type of image of, even if it's completely inaccurate, is we're not supposed to make any type of image of God. But God says we're going to make man in our image. Also, plural is an interesting way of speaking. In short, man is made in the image of God. We look at the second pasuk, source 1. Vayivra Elokim et Adam b'tzalmo. God made man in His image. B'tzelem Elokim barato zachar nekava baratam. God made man in His image, and that's it. He made them male and female. That's the pasuk. Rabbi Sacks chose this pasuk as what he described as the most central and the most transformative pasuk, not only in the entire Torah, but also in the development of human society. Why is that? What does this pasuk really tell us?
That man comes from a positive, so that there is a divine providence, a divine nature of man.
There is something inside man which is sacred, which is divine. It's like a little, we don't know what the image of God is, but whatever that image is, part of that is put into every single human being. Now, to point out how central that idea is, Rabbi Sacks referenced one of the most famous texts, I would say, in Western thought, which kind of is the underpinning of a lot of the kind of the entire thought process that we live in as Westerners today. What's the text where this idea comes up again? Declaration of Independence, right? Let's read source 2. This is Rabbi Sacks' first essay on the Torah in his book Essays on Ethics, where he brings out the ethical message of Parashat Bereshit. Do I have a volunteer to read source 2? Go for it.
There are words that change the world, none more so than 2 sentences that appear in the first chapter of the Torah. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God He created them, male and female He created them. The idea set forth here is perhaps the most transformative in the entire history of moral and political thought. It is the basis of the civilization of the West, with its unique emphasis on the individual and on equality. It lies behind Thomas Jefferson's words in the American Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights.
We don't really know what Tzelem Elokim, the image of God, means, but we know that each human being has this special aspect to them, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Now, Rabbi Sacks goes on to point out that if there was anything which wasn't self-evident over human history, what is it? Nowadays it's self-evident that all human beings have a certain amount of dignity, that we believe in inequality, that all people are basically equal and they should be given freedom and they should be respected as human individuals. That is only a tiny, tiny, tiny snippet of human history. If you look back, pretty much throughout the vast, vast, vast majority of human history, it has not been self-evident at all that human beings are all equal and they're all made in the image of God. If you look at ancient history, for example, there was the idea of human beings being made in the image of God. Who did it extend to?
Citizens. Years.
Go even further back, before it became just one class of citizens. Who was made in the image of God? Where do we find, if we look through history, these kind of great big statues being made of human beings? Or you find kings, you find great emperors, great rulers. The pharaohs, the Caesars were sons of God, or they were made in the image of God. What was the one thing that you never found? You never found this idea that all human beings are made in the image of God. And one would never find that, because as soon as you do that, what you're basically saying?
That he was going there's no power to
That pretty much everyone's equal, right? So the basic idea, which is people living in 2022, we all take as granted that all human beings are equal and should be afforded respect and dignity, doesn't really exist. When does it start to exist? It starts creeping in. It gets its most kind of clear utterance in the Declaration of Independence. And from that point onwards, as it goes back earlier, but from that point onwards, as kind of the concept of democracy swept across Northern America and Western Europe, and then eventually is slowly, not so well in certain places in the world, but it's definitely slowly spreading across society. We've kind of taken this to be self-evident, that all human beings are equal, that we should all be treated with a certain amount of respect. That was completely new. It ruins all hierarchies, essentially. Because really what you're saying, as was just mentioned before, is that all people at some level have this basic part of them which can never be questioned, which is godly and made in the image of God, and therefore we all must be equal to a certain extent. Now, this idea, where does this idea start from? The only ancient text where you're going to find this idea coming up is the Torah. Right? Very early in, as soon as human beings are made, we're told they're made in the image of God. Now, let's just squash the whole of human history into about 2 sentences. What eventually happens? Well, the Jews live by this idea. That's why the Torah is a very, very, very fascinating work when you compare it to old ancient ideas, where basically they try, there are definitely parts of it which doesn't seem to be working well in, but they try to give equality, or at least dignity, to every single human being. For example, slavery, which was what the Jews got freed from. The Torah is the first place you find that slaves get a day off work. What is the day? The day is Shabbos, and Shabbos you're supposed to rest, and your servants, your slaves, are also supposed to rest. In Rabbi Sacks' words, and this is an idea which we'll look at in maybe another shir, maybe we'll even challenge this idea, the end of slavery began in the Torah as soon as the Torah said that your slaves have to rest on the seventh day, they have to rest on Shabbos. But whether or not that particular example is a good example, this idea became present in the human consciousness because of the Torah. And then eventually the reason why we're aware of it today and we take it as granted today is because Judaism eventually Christianity developed from Judaism. The Roman Empire eventually converted to Christianity. Christianity became the dominant religion in Europe. Christians took the Torah on, at least they took this part of the Torah on, and it was an idea that all human beings are created equal, they're all made in the image of God. It got somewhat corrupted within Catholicism, but when Martin Luther began his Lutheran revolution of sorts, or at least his ideological revolution, and when Protestants started to emerge and they returned to the sources, what they believed to be the kind of roots of Christianity, they looked at these psukim, they said all human beings are made equal, we don't necessarily need a pope who is considered to be higher than other people. The concept of human beings being made in the image of God, and therefore they've each got this amount of sacred dignity, spread through Christianity across Europe. Eventually, with the founding fathers, it got to America. The founding of America, the roots are extremely, extremely religious, and they're always, travel through Washington. There's plenty of Americans here who know better than me. Travel through Washington D.C., you'll see psukim written in all different monuments everywhere. That eventually became the accepted idea of the Western world until today, where today it's self-evident that all human beings are made in the image of God, but it never was. And that's what Rabbi Sacks says was so transformative about this pasuk. This pasuk is the pasuk which changed the world, which made the world as we know it what it is today. Any questions? Thoughts?
It seems here that men and women are equal, but man was created first, and then woman was created after. So there's a differentiation.
There's a difference, but no one's ever. This hasn't ever. The chronology of people being created. First of all, it's very interesting because in these psukim, man and woman are created at the same time.
Exactly.
Right. This is one of the big questions about Bereshit in general. If you look in Perek Aleph of Bereshit, men and women are created at the same time. If you look in Perek Bet, man is created before woman. If you look in Perek Aleph of Bereshit, plants, animals, all those things are created before man. What we don't often get taught is if you look in Perek Bet of Sefer Bereshit, man is created first, and afterwards all the plants and all the trees start to grow. The whole differences between the first two parakim of Bereshit is fascinating. There's a lot of apparent contradictions, a lot of strange things going on there. It's a great topic. I don't think we'll get into it Don't think we'll get into it now.
How does he deal, Rabbi Sacks, with the fact that Enlightenment thinkers brought these ideas from a more secular and rationalist perspective, ideas of individualism and human rights? They didn't necessarily refer to the Christian tradition.
So I think if you look back at the beginning, it very much did come from a religious place, right? The founding fathers, for example, based it off the Bible, right?
No,
they said it themselves.
But they're not.
A lot of the early kind of modern English philosophers also based it somewhat off this idea that human beings are created with a certain kind of godly dignity to them. What starts to change, and what you really see definitely strongly nowadays, which we're going to get to, which Rabbi Sacks was very bothered by, is what happens when one still believes in a free society, but you take out the godly element. It's quite hard to say, if you don't believe in God, I guess, that human beings are made in the image of God. I mean, it's impossible, right? You can say that all human beings are equal and they have certain rights and stuff like that. But Rabbi Sacks is very, very bothered about the secularization of this idea. Because he didn't seem to think that it could last, at least last over a long period of time, if there wasn't kind of this given. What's really going on in this concept, what's so striking about this idea, is that there's just this basic given that all human beings are made in the image of God. You could be tall, you could be short, you could be brilliant, you could be stupid, you could be a terrible person, you could be a good person, you could be all these different things. There's still this kind of basic given thing within every human being, and that kind of creates a baseline, which none of us can ever kind of fall under. As soon as you start taking that element away, then you start to wonder, maybe, and there have been societies where this has happened, right? Which we'll get to soon. There's a big question here, which I think gets to the kind of the next stage, which I want to go with this, is that this is a lovely historical account, but how can one really say that a posuk written at least 3,000 years ago is really transformative of the world today? Right? Are we really saying that, is Rabbi Sacks really trying to argue that the world is as it is today because God said a long, long time ago that human beings were made in the image of God? What does Rabbi Sacks say? Rabbi Sacks says an idea which is crucial in his thought, which we're going to get to when we discuss certain mitzvahs which definitely don't seem to fit in with modern society. He says, in short, that it takes a long time. This is something he doesn't cover. Why does it take a long time? Why does it have to take a long time? Anyone got any ideas, any suggestions?
Communication was, moved at a, glacial pace at that time.
Okay. I guess I can ask the question in a more philosophical way. If God really wanted to change the world and make it this way, he's pretty powerful person, right? Not person.
So maybe he didn't want it to say it needed time to.
Okay. That's.
You like that one better?
Yeah, let's develop ideas. And what do people think about that? If this was, what Rabbi Sacks is basically saying is that the world was supposed to go in this direction. He's saying that modernity is good. This value we have in the world nowadays is good, it's true. It's not only true, it's also ancient. It was put in there from the Torah from the very beginning. Why would it have to take such a long time? Let's read source. For some reason, it's also source 2, but it's supposed to be source 4. Anyone want to read it? The second source 2.
The Genesis of Justice. So the Torah is in the medium of time. It did not abolish slavery, but it set in motion a series of developments, most notably Shabbat, when all hierarchies of power were suspended, and slaves had a day a week of freedom that were bound to lead to its abolition. That were bound to lead to its abolition in the course of time. People are slow to understand the implication of ideas. Thomas Jefferson, champion of equality, was a slave owner. Slavery was not abolished in the United States until the 1860s, and not without a civil war. And as Abraham Lincoln pointed out, slavery's defenders, as well as its critics, cited the Bible when discussing their cause. But eventually, people change, and they do so because of the power of ideas, planted long ago in the Western mind. All nations in the ancient world had priests, but none was a kingdom of priests. from Exodus 19:6. All religions have holy individuals, but none claim that every one of their members is holy. This too took time to materialize. During the entire biblical era, there were hierarchies. There were priests and high priests, a holy elite. But after the destruction of the Second Temple, every prayer became a sacrifice. Every leader of prayer a priest, and every synagogue a fragment of the temple. A profound egalitarianism is at work just below the surface of the Torah, and the rabbis knew it and knew it.
What's he saying here? What are the examples he brings? What have we got? We've got slavery, right, which we discussed before. What else have we got? Kohanim. Temple.
Korbanot.
Beit HaMikdash became every single shul. What's the problem, just kind of, if we're going to critique Rabbi Sacks, what's the problem with this idea which he's putting forward? His idea is there's basically this slow egalitarianism which crept through Judaism as Judaism became more equal and more, I would say, democratized, not only in terms of individuals, but also in terms of structures and societies. And from then it spread across the entire world. I think there's a problem built into this idea, at least with his examples. What do we believe in? What are we all praying for? To a certain extent, definitely for the Beis HaMikdash, we're praying for it again. So I'm not sure if the example is so good. He quotes the Rambam, right? Let's quote the Rambam here. Nope. He goes on in the same essay to quote the Rambam. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, when it comes to discussing the reasons for the mitzvahs, very often talks about this idea of things happening slowly. What's the prime example? He seems to say that the reason behind animal sacrifice is the Jews came out of Mitzrayim. They were now supposed to serve God. Animal sacrifice was the practice of all religions at that point in time. To simply tell the Jews to stop sacrificing completely would be one step too far to demand from them. So what he basically did is he took this kind of necessary evil and he directed it in the right direction. Instead of bringing sacrifices to idols, what do? We bring sacrifices to God. Is this the opinion of the Rambam? It's very, very complicated. It's very, very controversial. The Rambam definitely himself seems to say that in one place in the Moreh Nevuchim and seems to contradict it in another place. And in all the halachic works of the Rambam, this idea seems to clash with what he's saying. But this idea is not unique to Rabbi Sacks. It appears in a lot of Jewish thinkers, which is that God started a process with the Torah. A process where eventually things would develop and eventually would come to what it was designed to be. Now, I'll give you an example. The Rambam it's actually a Rambam which was taken out of the Yad HaChazaka of the Mishnah Torah by certain censors, and you'll see for obvious reasons why. The Rambam says this kind of idea also when it comes to the development of Christianity and Islam. He actually saw, although he didn't consider them to be legitimate, I mean they were religions, but he didn't consider them to be legitimate ways of serving God. He actually saw positive progression in the fact that Christianity had developed and Islam later developed. If you look in source 4, the Rambam, at the end of Hilchos Malachim, when he's eventually getting around to describing the Messianic era, what's going to happen when Mashiach eventually comes, which, by the way, just to remind everyone, for the Rambam is not a kind of miraculous turn of events where the Beit HaMikdash literally falls through the sky and they're huge supernatural miracles. For the Rambam, the coming of Mashiach is the Jews having complete sovereignty, being completely free, living in Eretz Yisrael, and seemingly building the Beit HaMikdash of their own means. He believes that happens completely in rational, non-miraculous ways. But on the way to describing that account, he says as follows. Look at source 4. V'chol hadvarim einu, shel Yeshua HaNotzri, reference to Jesus, v'shel Zah Yishmaeli, shel Medacharav, and this Ishmaelite, reference to Muhammad, who came after him, einam ela liyasher derech lemelech HaMashiach, only there to smooth the path of the Mashiach, and to perfect the world, to fix the world, everyone to serve God together. I'm going to turn all the nations into a clear speech, as in they're going to speak correctly, they're going to have the right ideas, to call in the name of Hashem, and to serve Him together. How's that going to be? The Rambam, this is writing in the 1200s, right? The entire world is already full of the idea of the Messiah, right? They've paved the way for it. And Medivrei Torah, Medivrei HaMitzvahs. And people are already all talking about the Torah and all talking about mitzvahs. And these matters have spread in far islands and in many nations. These pagans, which the Rambam never thought would ever talk, people never thought would ever talk about one God, are suddenly all talking about it. So some of them, reference to Christianity, are saying, yeah, they used to have these mitzvahs, but they've already been cancelled. And they were never used for many generations. And some people say they're contradictory. We shouldn't understand them as they're written in the Torah. But the point Rambam was trying to say is people have all their qualms about, yes, this part of the Torah, not part of the Torah, my Torah, your Torah, they're all talking about some kind of the Torah. And Mashiach will eventually come and he's gonna reveal their contradictions, as in he's going to resolve these contradictions. Eventually when the Mashiach comes, there'll be this small transformation. They'll be able to sift off and filter away the non-true parts of their various religions, the incorrect inaccuracies, and thanks to what Christianity has done, thanks to what Islam has done, the world is much more closer to arriving what the Rambam believes to be the ultimate goal, to arriving at the ultimate truth. This idea, I'll just bring this as one example, is not necessarily new to Rabbi Sacks. It's a very interesting idea, and you can kind of see why someone with Rabbi Sacks' thought and with Rabbi Sacks' mission would actually embrace this idea fully. Rabbi Sacks essentially was someone who had to take the old to the new. He had to, his life mission in many ways was explaining the Torah in ways which, in genuine ways, in ways which he believed to be true, in ways which were related to the modern world, because he saw a lot of good, and there is a lot of good in the modern world. And this is kind of the natural approach to take, that things take a lot of time. But there is a much deeper point here, which Rabbi Sacks doesn't refer to much in his writing, but refer to occasionally where he spoke, which is a very, very profound idea. And that is, why does it have to take a long time? Well, it takes a long time because human beings are slow. Societies develop at an incredibly slow rate. We're impatient when we see injustice in the world, and we probably should be. But in the end of the day, the last century or so, there's been much more change than in many, many centuries which preceded it. But things are slow. But if we kind of looked at it theologically, which was the question I had before, things don't need to be slow. Right? If God really wanted this to happen, why did he make it take such a long time? So an idea which Rabbi Sacks says very, very often is that if it's going to happen through human means, then it has to take a long time. It's not that God wants the world to eventually move to a certain place. If he wanted to do that, he could do it pretty quickly. God wants human beings to move the world to a certain place. The world is here for us to perfect it, for us to move it. And therefore, the reason why it took an awfully long time is because we took an awfully long time doing it. The role of human beings within the world, this is an idea which appears in a lot of places in Jewish thought, but Rabbi Sacks was a keen proponent of it, is that we're, so to speak, partners in creation. We have to make the world move forward. And therefore, it takes a long, long time because we have to kind of pick up the baton and go with it and move it forward. Rabbi Sacks doesn't say this, but if I just add it in as a kind of nice little vort. What does the Pasuk says? The Pasuk says, Na'as Adam b'tzelmeinu kudnutenu. Let us make man in his image, in our likeness. Who makes man? Who makes society? Why is it plural? So you've got a nice Midrash about God speaking to the Malachim. It could also be that God is inviting man, God is speaking to man. That together, man and God together, hand in hand, because man is doing God's work, eventually makes the world a better place, and eventually makes man be in the image of God. That's kind of, I would say, the first main idea why Rabbi Sacks thought this pasuk was so central and so transformative. Any questions, thoughts, suggestions?
So still coming from the theological point of view, why can't God move us along faster? Like, I get the idea that...
Because then it's not us, right?
That would still be God making things happen.
Yeah. He has to leave it completely to us.
Okay.
That's why it takes a long time. That's why the ups and downs along the way, and that's why a lot of bad things happen, because human beings do a lot of good things, they also do a lot of bad things. But God, so to speak, takes a step back. He takes a step back, so there's room for us to take a step forward.
Does that contradict, there's like, in terms of creation ideas, like there's the clockmaker theology that God sets the world in motion and then steps back. And I thought we didn't like that idea, that we like, no, God's an active participant in creation, and creation is an ongoing process and continues to happen at all times. So, if God says, no, you guys I'm going to let you develop the world, and so it has to take a long time, how does that impact that idea that creation is ongoing and God plays an active role in the world?
So the truth is, it's a great question, and it's also a great debate, as in, within the kind of span of Jewish thinkers, you have those who assume that God is literally, the reason why my hand is still in the air is because God literally just put it back there, and he's continuing it to be in the air, as in you have that he's literally involved in every single leaf which falls from a tree. It's kind of like one extent, to other opinions which hold that God created the world. He's still fully clued in, as in he's still fully knowledgeable of what goes on in the world, but he gives human beings pretty much unlimited free choice. And there's many variants in the middle. Where is Rabbi Sacks in this spectrum? Great question. I think maybe we'll do an entire session on that, on kind of what's Rabbi Sacks's opinion on the big question of kind of freedom and determinism. That actually is a great bridge to another crucial thing which Rabbi Sacks saw coming out from this possible. We've said that human beings are made in God's image. And that kind of gives them this baseline dignity, this baseline sanctity, this one element which can't be taken away. But what is that? What is the image of God? It's definitely not a literal image of God. Any suggestions? Truth is, everyone who's anyone has kind of discussed this question, right? Going from the Mefarshim on the Psukim to all the 20th century thinkers, everyone who wants to explain this pasuk of man being made in the image of God, and there's a whole array of different approaches. But what you have to find is what is there about God which we see also carry on within human beings. What characteristic of God? What characteristic do we share with God? If we think about it, there's a few, but definitely one of them, and this is the one which Rabbi Sacks picked, is the fact that we're free. We have free will. What does it mean when man is made in the image of God? Human beings are free. God is free. I mean, on a very surface level, that basically means God is free. He can do whatever he likes. He's unbound. And therefore, we're free. Now, this idea is actually much, much, much deeper. And maybe to see why it's so deep, we'll read Rabbi Sacks' words himself. Anyone want to read source 5? Any volunteers?
Okay. Rabbi Sacks' Genesis of Justice. Third implication lies in the sheer paradox of God saying, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." We sometimes forget when reading these words that in Judaism God has no image or likeness. To make an image of God is to transgress the second of the Ten Commandments and to be guilty of idolatry. Moses emphasized that at the revelation in Sinai. We saw no likeness. We only heard the sound of words. Deuteronomy 4:12. God has no image because he is not physical. He transcends the physical universe because he created it. Therefore, he is free, unconstrained by the laws of matter. That is what God means when he tells Moses that his name is, "I will be what I will be." Exodus 3:14. And later when, after the sin of the golden calf, he tells him, "I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy." Exodus 33:19. God is free, and by by making us in his image, he gave us also the power to be free.
So really this idea is much deeper than just kind of God is free and therefore is unbound, so too we're free. What is God by definition? He's separate, he's transcendent. What does transcendent mean? Transcendent just means transcendent. Transcendent means he's kind of unreachable. He's beyond the kind of physical binds of the universe. Now, by declaring God transcendent, when you say God's transcendent, what you really mean is precisely that. The rules of science don't apply. It's not physically bound. Now, human beings are also, therefore, if they're made in the image of God, they're transcendent. That means there'll be one part of the human being, the human consciousness, which won't be dependent on scientific rules or on causation. Every single aspect of the world pretty much follows scientific rules, right? There's some kind of cause and some kind of consequence, and pretty much if we're clever enough or we have good enough predictive tools, we can basically say what everything will happen in the world, what the weather will be like tomorrow, because everything is cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. There is some chemical process, some physical process, some biological process. It doesn't make a difference behind every single thing which happens in the world. When there's a consequence, there's a cause behind it. By saying that human beings are made in the image of God, he's saying there's an aspect of human beings which is transcendent. That means that human beings are free. Human beings have free will. That means that there are certain things that human beings are doing, can do, which one won't be able to predict. It won't follow the rules of science. In other words, and how we explain this with modern science and determinism and the fact that we do actually think that human beings aren't really free, that every single actions of ours can be predicted based off nature, based off nurture, based off all different whatever it is, different circumstances. Human beings would have to explain that, but human beings are declared to be partially transcendent in the term. They're given free will. And that is what it means for Rabbi Sacks to be in the image of God. Now the truth is, he's not original in this. There was someone came up with this idea first. Anyone heard of who came up with this idea? Who said that what it means to be Tzelem Elokim means that man has free will? Meshech Chochmah. The Meshech Chochmah is the one who's known for popularizing this opinion. The Meshech Chochmah of Meir Simcha Medvinsk lived at the beginning of the 20th century. For him, it was a much more startling comment to say than Rabbi Sacks, based off the time which he lived in. But here I've just quoted just as a soundbite in Source. Nas Adam b'Tzelmenu, the Meshech Chochmah and the Pasuk, Tzelem Eloki hu abechira chofshis bli teva machriach. Tzelem Elokim is bechira chofshis, as in free will, without nature forcing you what to do. Rak meratzon v'seicha chofshi, only through a human being's will and their free mind. What is the second important point which Rabbi Sacks says stems from this pasuk of Nas Adam b'Tzelmenu, that human beings were made in the image of God? They have this basic dignity, and at the same time, they have free will. Which, by the way, if you put both those things together, comes to a startling conclusion, which is that if you take away a person's freedom to a certain degree, what are you taking away? Their dignity. Any questions?
Why is that startling? Why is that startling?
I think it's an amazing idea. That you're not just robbing someone of their freedom, you're actually robbing someone of the one thing which is non-physical about them, the one thing which is transcendent about them. I guess this is even within modern science what we believe, that human beings have a conscience. And what separates, we're definitely animals. What separates us from the rest of the animals is that we have some kind of conscience, we have some ability of being aware of our decisions. Now the third idea, and I'll kind of go through this quickly because we touched on it before. The third idea behind all of this is what Rabbi Sacks says is that if human beings are made in the image of God, then what must we all be? We're all equal. At least there's this kind of baseline equality, which is kind of what we said before. We take for granted, right? As soon as we kind of grow up, we watch Disney and we always kind of support the underdog, and we always want the person who's good to win as opposed to the person who's strong to win. And that's an idea which like we explained at the beginning of this year, comes completely through Judaism, eventually through Judaism to Christianity, to the general thought of the Western world. But if we say that all human beings are made in God's image, we're saying they have this basic dignity, they have freedom, and they also are equal to a certain extent. This idea was, like I said before, this idea was transformative. It didn't used to exist in the ancient world. Rabbi Sacks wasn't unique in citing this idea. There's a Gemara which actually talks about this. If you look in source 10, man was created alone in the world. A person who kills a person, we consider it as if they destroyed the entire world. And anyone who keeps one person alive, as in saves a life, we make it as if they kept the entire world alive. Why else? Why do we? Why also was man made? As in, when Adam Rishon was made, one human being was made. So there'd be peace. No one will be able to say that my father's better than your father, my daddy's bigger than your daddy. Basically, we all eventually come from the same human being. And so heretics won't say that there are many different gods in the heaven. By having all human beings being created singularly and coming from one person, coming from Adam Rishon, basically we're saying there must be one God. This isn't an amazing philosophical argument. The argument is basically like this. As in, if there are multiple gods, there'd be multiple different humans being created. Since there's only one type, then presumably there's only one God. Now, what Rabbi Sacks did, which was striking, is he actually always, and I'm not quite sure about this idea, but he inverted this idea. He always used to say that when mankind came across monotheism, when they came up with this idea that there must be one God, they also at the same time found the importance of each individual. Now, Gemara here seems to do the other way around. It seems to say that every individual is important, and by seeing that every individual comes from one man, comes from the same person, is equal, it must be that there's one God. Because if there were multiple gods, then presumably there'll be multiple levels of multiple different types of human beings. What Rabbi Sacks tried to do, you can see it in source 9, is the opposite. This may well be the single most important consequence of monotheism, discovering God singular and alone. Our ancestors discovered the human individual singular and alone. People used to think that the universe has a structure to it, right? In the same way, there's a kind of you have the structure of the animal kingdom. You have various different parts of the makeup, the physical makeup of the world, where there's a structure, there's a hierarchy. Whatever it is, that the lion eats the buffalo, which eats the grass, then so too in the heavens there is some kind of a hierarchy. If you look at the Greek gods and the Roman gods, there were hierarchies. There were titans, there were gods, there was Zeus, who was the god of gods. You had all these different hierarchies in the world. Eventually what happened is, as soon as mankind discovered, and then presumably if the gods have hierarchies, then presumably human beings should have hierarchies also. Now, eventually when mankind came across this striking idea of monotheism, that there is no hierarchy in heaven, there's only one God, then they eventually began to question hierarchies in the world. Maybe if there's no hierarchy in heaven, there's no hierarchy in the world, and there isn't different levels of human being. All human beings are made on the same level. Now, let's take this all forward to another place where Rabbi Sacks writes about this. Rabbi Sacks, when he came to discussing this within the modern world, not discussing the roots of this idea, was very, very bothered, and he saw this as being one of the main ideas that come from the Torah, which is being challenged in the world today. He spoke at length, and to a certain extent, this is kind of one of the main ideas behind his book, The Great Partnership, where he discusses the clash between religion and science. The clash between religion and science is not just a kind of small, almost textual argument about whether the world was made in 6 days or was made in however many billion years, but it's also an argument about what the conclusions of either following a religious approach to life or following a scientific approach to life, what conclusions that makes about society. Rabbi Sacks was very bothered about the aspect of Darwinian science, not the evolutionary aspect, but the aspect which would imply that human beings are simply only a biological organism. That if one believes that there is nothing transcendent, there's nothing godly within a human being, then we rob the human being of this sacred kernel which is inside it. We rob the human being of being made in the image of God. And Rabbi Sacks reflected on how that hasn't gone well at all in history when that kind of basic foundational point has been questioned before. Let's read Rabbi Sacks in source 11 in his introduction to his essays on ethics. Anyone want to read? Go for it.
Many, perhaps all, of these beliefs are currently at risk in the temporary West. First, human dignity. One result of Darwinian biology has been to erode the differences between humans and other animals. We share 98% of our genes with primates. A group of distinguished scientists declared in a statement about human cloning in 1997, humankind's rich repertoire of thoughts, feelings, aspirations, and hopes seem to arise from electrochemical brain processes, not from a immaterial soul that operates in ways no instrument can discover. Nietzsche was the first to see that the higher our scientific achievements, the lower our self-evaluation as humans. And in the precedent passage, he wrote, God, alas, is man's faith in his dignity, uniqueness, and irreplaceable in us. And in the rank ordering of being, he has become animal, literally, unqualifiably, and reservedly an animal. Human dignity, it seems, cannot survive the loss of the concept of the image of God.
Science works by rules. Freedom by definition doesn't work by rules. In a world outlook which is, Rabbi Sacks wasn't against science, talking against science, in a world view which is purely scientific and purely looks at human being as being another animal, maybe a more intelligent animal, or whatever this quote here was saying, literally unqualified and reservedly an animal because all human brain processes are just electrochemical processes, then one can run in the long term into very difficult consequences. If human beings don't have this baseline of being made in the image of God, then how do we value human beings? Maybe what's special about human beings is their utility, the fact that they can do more things than animals, they can provide more for society than animals can. They can build society, they're pretty clever, they can do a lot of things. What's that going to lead to? If we start assessing people based on their utility, that will lead to huge societal problems, because eventually, for example, old people are definitely got less utility and give less to society than young people, right? You can have a situation where old people eventually are a drain on society's resources. Disabled people, for example, right? If we're assessing human beings just as good biological animals or not, then we're also going to have problems in that department. This idea of being able to treat each human being with dignity, irrespective of their utility, irrespective of what they're able to do, is very fragile. Because as soon as you question that element to them, as soon as you question the idea that they're made in the image of God, then eventually we're going to the place it goes, and Rabbi Sacks quoted a lot of examples in human history, the place it goes is very bad. Right? If you start looking at human beings based off what they give or take away from society, I mean, we're already kind of, this is bringing back vibes of Nazi Germany, where if there's a type of breed of human being which is bad for society, then it's in society's interest to get rid of them. As soon as you lose this sanctity which you're given to each human being, the consequences can be dire. We're coming to the end, so I just want to kind of reference two more ideas which Rabbi Sacks, one more idea which Rabbi Sacks brought out from this pasuk, from this idea that the man is made in God's image. Let's read source 12 together. I'll read source 12. If human beings are mere organisms like any other, with nothing to distinguish them from the animals, then there is nothing whatever to justify the idea that we should treat them as ends rather than as means. The supreme irony of contemporary secular ethics is that humans are treated as possessors of rights because they have autonomy, the ability to choose, whilst at the same time evolutionary psychology and neuroscience are undermining the very idea that we can choose anything at all. In Western society, we have two simultaneous contradictory drives, kind of within modern Western ideology. On one hand, we view freedom to be the most important thing, right? We take even the World Cup in Qatar, right? As soon as there's any type of limitation or boundary put on human freedom, we consider it to be a bad thing. But at the same time, we're embracing a scientific approach which questions the very existence of freedom, and therefore would undermine all what we want to get out of freedom being the most important thing within society. At the same time, evolutionary psychology and neuroscience undermining the very idea that we can freely choose anything at all. The contradiction at the heart of the secularized view of humanity cannot be sustained forever. It's no accident that freedom occupies a central place in the Hebrew Bible, but only a tenuous place in the annals of science. The relationship of soul to body or mind to brain is precisely analogous to the relationship of God to the physical universe. If there is only a physical universe, there is only brain, not mind, and there is only universe, not God. The non-existence of God and the non-existence of human freedom go hand in hand. Now, Rabbi Sacks, for good reason, and I think this is true, always kind of moved away from and tried to avoid ever saying that the existence and belief in God walks hand in hand with the existence and adherence to morality. Because it's not true. There are plenty of people who don't believe in God, who can be very good moral people. But what Rabbi Sacks often said, and this kind of comes out from a lot of his writings, is that it's very hard to maintain morality within society over an extended period of time without there being some kind of religious underlying assumption, which is that, for example, if we're going to maintain freedom, we're going to look at all human beings with dignity, we have to have this assumption, which is essentially a religious assumption, because if you look from purely scientific perspective, there's no reason really to differentiate between human beings and other animals, other than it's quantitative, they're just more intelligent, they're just more functional, they just have greater utility. So it's very hard to sustain over time. But in this particular paragraph is probably his most extreme place where he takes this idea, because what he's really saying here is actually the relationship between God and the world is the same as the relationship between freedom and human beings. But by saying God exists, what are we basically saying? What's the basic idea which is behind that? Basically saying there's something in the world which isn't physical. There is a non-materialist aspect to the world. If you claim that there is no non-materialist aspect to the world, then it's impossible to say there's a non-materialist aspect to the human being. There's something distinct. Human beings have some kind of sacred... the human beings are distinct, they have something sacred within them. If you say the world is literally physical and nothing else, then human beings will be physical and nothing else. So, if deism, religion to a certain extent, if belief in God falls, then at the same time it's very hard to sustain the dignity of mankind. Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe I'm wondering this because I have a different definition of what freedom is, what freedom to choose, but when I think about it, I think of some sort of idea of having options. But when I think about Torah, we're not really dealing with something that gives us a lot of freedom in the sense of halacha. Like, Torah is pretty prescriptive in the way, there's one way to live life. Everyone has different interpretations of it. But the Torah is pretty prescriptive in what's right and what's wrong. So giving people an idea of, you either live this way, which is the right way according to Torah, or you don't do that. Is that really freedom? So
it's a great question, right? As in the Torah believes in freedom, and it gives you a ton of things that you have to do.
Yeah.
It's a great question. I think what the real question is how do we define freedom? I've just been taking it as a 7-letter word, and that's it. That is something which I hope to discuss over the course of this year. It's a Rabbi Sacks approach, and he speaks about this a lot. One good place to look at is his essays on Pesach, because there's no other great time than Pesach for reflecting on this apparent contradiction, which is we become a free people on Pesach, and we become the Jewish people on Pesach. Being Jewish is getting a lot of halachas kind of chucked in there, getting a lot of things which we need to do. So it's an excellent question. The real question is how we define freedom. Which I very much hope to get to. Anyway,
You go to the point before.
yes.
You said that the belief in the existence of God necessitates a belief in dignity of man.
What Rabbi Sacks says is as follows, right? And what we have to do is we have to look at a very kind of slim version of God, right? Forget God, religion, all the definitions we have. If you believe in God, one thing which you're saying, one premise which you're taking is given, is that something exists outside the physical properties of the world. There's something there, right? There's some force, some power, which can't be measured and isn't located, cannot be measured by any given scientific process. That's a premise. That's like an axiom you're taking as given if you believe in God. If believing in human freedom is exactly the same, there is no scientific or biological reason to believe that human beings should have free will. In fact, it could be that one can predict all what a human being will do. This is the famous question, right? Just based off nature nurture, right? Science is deterministic. It could be we haven't exactly worked out what the scientific rules are, but science seemingly believes that all things which exist follow scientific rules. There is some material explanation, be on a micromolecular level or whatever it is, for every single thing which happens.
I can believe in one and not the other, right? I can believe in the existence of God and not in the freedom of man.
Correct, but it's very hard to believe in the opposite. Believe that human beings have freedom, and there's nothing transcendental in the world. There's nothing out in the world outside scientific rules.
Well, why can't you? So when you say that, that's the piece that I am struggling with, because you could. Why do you have to believe in God for that, and you couldn't replace God with laws of morality? I don't really believe in God, this whole idea of transcendental being, but I think that there is a governing morality that is real. It's not physical.
That's it. That's all he wants to say. You've basically just had a very slim version of God. There is something non-physical. There is something transcendental. You've called them the laws of morality. Someone else will call it God. Whatever happens to be, there is something out there beyond the physical properties of the universe.
Well, that's a really different.
That's why I said it's a very slim idea of God. He's not saying that this is a reason why people should go to shul on Shabbat, right? He's saying that there has to be something outside the physical properties of the world for there to be this assumption that human beings have free will.
Fine.
You're saying ideas which are elevated beyond deterministic scientific.
There has to be something.
Right.
What it is, what it does, why it is, all good questions. But there is something there.
And he allows for that. In other words, because I would imagine that someone like Rabbi Sacks would say, yeah, it's kind of the same to replace God with morality. As I'm saying it, I would imagine that someone like Rabbi Sacks would be like, yeah, conceptually it's similar, but don't go there.
Yeah, but it would be don't go there for other reasons.
Right. Okay.
Right, for many other reasons. It's not all the aspects, all the ideas behind God or behind Judaism would kind of come in one fell swoop and one philosophical proof,
But
right?
It's case,
like all complex ideas, many stages stacked on top of each other to build one great framework. But in this particular case, there has to be something thin, something which isn't within the binds of the physical world. I'll just read.
So was wrong on that, but I think it comes from he's negating belief in only science as opposed to belief in religion as well. And that's where it's a starting point. It says if you believe in the existence of God, then you can believe in freedom. Isn't that where he contrasts the scientific belief and the religious belief?
If you believe in God,
So that allows you now to believe
in freedom, correct? That's what I'm saying. Precisely that. If you believe there's something non-physical,
you can believe in God and not believe in freedom. You can believe in God and yes, believe in freedom.
in theory, you could believe it. It's not what Rabbi Sacks is saying, but in kind of on a philosophical level, you could believe there's a God, and for some reason, He governs every single thing which happens in the world, and therefore we don't have freedom. That's just taking a supersized version of God. That there's being this huge non-physical thing in the world which controls every single thing. That's like the opposite extreme. As in, it's not symmetrical. As in, you can believe in God without believing in freedom. But he says it's very hard to believe in freedom without believing that there's something other than the physical bounds of the universe. Okay, we've gone past the end time. Let's end this with one great quote. There's no better writer out there to end it with than Rabbi Sacks. Let's just read source 13 together. Momentous ideas made the West what it is. Ideas like human rights, the abolition of slavery, the equal worth of all, and justice based on the principle that right is sovereign over might. All these ultimately derive from the statement in the first chapter of the Torah that we are made in God's image and likeness. No other text has had greater influence on moral thought, nor has any other civilization ever held a higher vision of what we are called on to be. That's it for today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to stay behind afterwards and chat. Come over and introduce yourself. We'll be back. We'll be back next week, 9 o'clock here. Topic will be decided during the week. Thank you for coming.